name is Scott Davison, and I'm a professor of philosophy at Morehead State University. Today we're talking about philosophy and death and fear and anxiety. So happy topics. We can't talk about everything philosophers say about this, just the greatest hits arguments you might say, but that should be enough for us today. Philosophers are committed to telling the truth and being honest based on what we can say from reason. So I'm going to be that way today. If you find it anxiety-provoking to talk about death and the virus, this may not be the video for you. If you need to stop in the middle and just jump out, don't worry, just go ahead and do that. Epicurus is an ancient philosopher who talked about death quite a bit. He lived in a time of trouble and anxiety. He wanted to give people a practical and rational basis for having a smooth and tranquil mind, which sounds pretty good right now, doesn't it? Epicurus said that when you die, your body's destroyed, and the tiny little atoms that make up your soul get scattered all over the place so that you don't survive. And you don't have to worry about anything after death because you won't be here. In fact, he said, if you think about the time before you were born, you're not afraid of that. Why should you be afraid of the time after you're dead? You don't exist in either time. What's the big deal? Problem solved. Death is nothing to us, he says. Where we are, death is not, and where death is, we are not. So we just shouldn't worry about it. Some people think, of course, that we survive death and we go to heaven where things are better. This raises questions about religion that I can't talk about today. It opens up a whole new can of worms, you might say. There's some non-religious evidence for survival of death, but it's pretty slim. We recommend a book here by Stephen Browdy about this question called Immortal Remains, if you're interested. Philosophers, on the whole, have not been crazy about Lucretius's argument, or Epicurus's argument here, because they're not convinced that we should treat these two times of non-existence in the same way. There seem to be differences, like I couldn't have been born much earlier, but I could have lived a lot longer if I die young. Death seems to deprive me of life, whereas not being born earlier doesn't seem to deprive me of life. And we may have a bias toward future times too. We might care more about the future, although that may not be rational. Look at Megan Sullivan's new book if you're interested in this question. There are some important distinctions that have come out of this debate. We have to distinguish the process of dying from the state of being dead from the consequences of dying. Epicurus only seems to care about the state of being dead. A contemporary philosopher, Robert Solomon, suggests other reasons why we might be afraid to die. He himself passed away not too long ago, sadly. He says, we fear death because it ends our plans and projects and goals and hopes. We worry about the people we care about. We will lose control of our story. We can't correct misinformation. We worry about dying badly in a way we don't want to die and being embarrassed about that. We also worry about how our body will be treated and turning into a disgusting corpse that people don't want to be around. These are fears, he says, real fears. In the time of virus, these fears are heightened and accentuated. We worry about dying before our time or losing loved ones who are not ready to go. We worry about having insufficient medical care and dying alone. We worry about being placed in a mass grave because they can't handle the number of bodies. We worry about depriving friends and family of closure with us or not having it with them. We worry about becoming an object of future infection for other people. These are real, serious fears. If you want to read about a worse kind of virus, you could read about the plague, the Black Plague. Albert Camus wrote a great book about this. No, right now you shouldn't read this book. It's too depressing. Give it a couple of years, maybe then. The only things that we really care about, according to Epictetus, the great ancient Stoic philosopher, are the things that we directly control. So death, disease, and poverty should not bother us at all. Again, this is an attempt to give us a smooth, tranquil mind using rational therapy. But is this even possible? It seems like human beings are constructed to care about whether they survive. We have all these reflexes that help us survive whether we want to or not. We have these fears like fear of heights and fear of spiders and fear of snakes. Even fear of public speaking is a fear about being cut off from other people and the people we need to survive. We're not alligators who lay eggs and walk away. We're social creatures. We depend on each other, not just for things, but for the roles we play. Our very identity as person depends on relationships we have with others, the things we do. So this is crazy. Jean-Paul Sartre, the great existentialist philosopher, tells us about how in some situations the crushing weight of making choices can be almost unbearable. When there's no path forward, we experience anguish. When we are alone making decisions, as we are now, we feel the crushing abandonment. And we feel anxiety because the responsibility for consequences is so great. If we make one false step, it could be terrible for us or for other people. We are condemned to be free, he says, and it feels like that right now. There's a social psychologist that's even studied the way the brain makes decisions and discovered that you have limited energy during your day. After a certain point, you reach a place where you start taking shortcuts and making bad decisions because your brain literally runs out of energy. He calls this decision fatigue. I highly recommend Roy Baumeister's book on this called Willpower. Nicholas Walterstorff is a philosopher who lost a son at the age of 25 to a climbing accident, wrote a book about this called Lament for a Son. Recently, he said grief is a combination of things. It's a strong desire to be with someone, plus the knowledge that you can't be with them. And those two things are irreconcilable rationally. You can't talk yourself out of it the way you might talk yourself out of anger, for instance. As long as you have those two things, you're going to have the grief in some form or fashion. And right now, you're already feeling grief. I miss people and places I want to go, things I want to do, roles I used to play. You're feeling this too. You're also feeling the anxiety of not knowing whether you're going to be able to pay your bills or finish your schooling or what's going to happen to those you love. It's like this. We have going on a number of things right now. We already have grief over losses. We also have, in addition to that, fear of more losses, significant fears, like I mentioned. We also have anxiety about the choices we have to make. And on top of that, every day, our brain runs out of energy. We have decision fatigue. No wonder by the time lunch comes, you're done. Over time, this is just going to ramp up and get worse as the pandemic gets worse where you live. Eventually, of course, most of these things are going to taper off. But for now, we're in a situation that Mr. Fox would certainly call a cluster cuss. So give yourself a break and give other people a break. Take a distraction. Watch a stupid video of somebody playing with their rabbits. Give yourself a little bit of leeway here. You're under extraordinary pressure. It's really something. People say, keep calm. We'll get through this together. The fact is that some of us will not get through this. Some of us are going to lose people who are near and dear to us. Some of us are going to experience grief because parts of our lives will never be the same. But over time, things are slowly going to get better, and eventually they're going to approximate the way things were before. I think that's the best we can do. Thank you for paying attention today. I appreciate your attention, and let me know if you want to talk about death. Send me an email. I appreciate it. Thank you.